right, here to help us break down everything that happened last week in the Tennessee State House of Representatives. If you haven't heard this news about the two Democratic members that were expelled, is Christopher Hale, the former Tennessee Democratic nominee for Congress, former staffer to President Obama. We're going to get into that in a second, and Democratic strategist. Christopher, Mike, and Nick, thank you for hopping on the podcast with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. It's been quite a week here in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to get into all of that. You know, it's funny because I know you follow our show account on Instagram, and you and I were exchanging some DMs about this. I wanted to get into this because I was getting so many different text messages from people over the course of the last couple of days. Are you watching this on TV? Are you seeing all of this play out? And, you know, obviously we mentioned here on the show about state politics, local politics, and people really being involved in this process, right? And you saw some of that play out. But for the national audience, for people that maybe weren't paying attention to all of this and what happened here with respect to post the school shooting and the protest that happened at the State House, can you take our audience a 30,000-foot overview of the entire situation and what led to these two members ultimately getting expelled?
Absolutely. Of course, on March 27th, which I think a lot of people remember, the Monday 2 weeks ago, there was a shooting at Covenant School, which is a private Christian school here in Nashville. 3 children killed, 3 adults. I think the particularities of it being a religious school as well was very striking. The shooter, Audrey Hale, no relation to me, came in, and after the shooting happened, there was a brief respite where really the governor did not speak. That shooting happened on Monday, and we didn't hear from the governor from the state of Tennessee, I believe, until the following Wednesday or Thursday. So there was a vacuum, if you will. And when he gave a speech, he did it in a pre-recorded video that was released online. No chance for questions, and he didn't say 2 words. He didn't say the word gun and the word Nashville. I think that's going to be very particular here. What happened is that week, there was 3 representatives that had a protest in the House floor. We can talk about the details of that protest in a minute, but really what they did is they showed up in the well of the floor. One representative, Justin Pearson from Memphis, had a bullhorn, and the House session stopped. And so I've been following Tennessee politics for a long time. This is normal. We have a raucous state house. But then the Speaker of the House went on a right-wing radio station here in Nashville and said it was an insurrection. It was worse than January 6th. And I think an honest assessment of that is that's clearly not the case. It was a small disruption. And he said that he was intending to move motions to expel the 3 members who did this. We thought he might be bluffing. We thought that this was actually come off a precipice, maybe an empty threat. He removed them from committees. And then on Thursday the following week, on Thursday, April 5th, he actually moved forward and did do this. Thursday, April 6th, there was 3 expulsion votes. The 2 young black men, Justin Jones is very well known here in Nashville. He's been an activist who's gotten arrested over a dozen times in the past few years, protesting the Confederate monuments. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK monument, was in the State House for a long time. He was one of those who was expelled. He was a member of the State House from Nashville, recently elected. And then another young man, Justin Pearson, who is also new to the scene. He's less known in the Nashville community, more known in Memphis. As we'll talk about later, there's really 3 distinct divisions in Tennessee that are very different from each other. He was expelled too. Gloria Johnson, a teacher, a 60-year-old teacher from Knoxville, Democrat, was not expelled. She had 2 lawyers come in and defend her. Kind of an interesting story. She had the predecessor of Justin Jones, a well-known former leader of the Democrats, Mike Stewart, and also, oddly enough, a very conservative Democrat from rural Tennessee, a pro-life, anti-abortion Democrat, who oftentimes sided with the Republicans on a myriad of issues, but gave a very passionate defense of Gloria Johnson, and basically argued that she did not participate in the same degree that the other 2 did. And so she was exonerated. Now, of course, the optics are horrible. You have 2 young black men in the home, the birthplace of the KKK, get expelled from State House, and the 1 white person did not. And that's caused an uproar. And the Republicans, I don't think, saw what was coming. They didn't understand. They've been in power for so long in this state, a supermajority for a decade plus, that they did not see how these 2 young men were going to be idolized and lifted up and have become a national story. So that's kind of the breakdown. I hope that kind of gives you a sense of how this played out and the ramifications really we have locally, but now clearly a national story.
Yeah, Christopher, to what you're alluding to in terms of the national implications, as you're speaking to it, from an outsider's view, it appears that a vote took place, right, and leading to the expulsion of two people, which shouldn't have happened. Just in terms of my own personal view, but it took place. It sounds like a vote took place. This was not an act of tyranny or what have you, or maybe it was. I don't know. But when you talk about momentum from what just happened, from your vantage point, with all eyes on Tennessee, what do you think is about to take place? What have you heard has been taking place? And what steps may be in place for these two men to rejoin potentially the state house, but more importantly, for any type of fervor or energy from the Democratic Party coming out of in light of the recent situation?
Sure. So these two men can be reappointed by state law, can be reappointed in an interim basis by their county commissions in Nashville. The county commission here at Metro Council intends tomorrow to, looks like the votes are there, to reinstate Justin Jones. And in Memphis, it's a little less certain. There's another story behind that. There's threats from state officials to revoke funding for a FedEx Forum, which is the home of the Memphis Grizzlies, if they reappoint Justin Pearson. But it does appear he has the votes there as well. But here's the new iteration of this. There's rumors on the street that have not been validated that it is not the intention of Cameron Sexton, who serves as the Speaker of the House of the state here in Tennessee, to actually seat these members. And then, of course, we'll go to a legal battle. That would be, I think that Speaker Sexton has made dumbheaded move after dumbheaded move. What you have here is the Democratic Party in the state of Tennessee has raised more money in the past 5 days than we have in the past 5 years. We've gotten more attention than we have in my 34 years of living. He's really made a martyr out of these two men and energized a state party that's been anemic for a long time. Phil Bredesen, our former governor, ran against Marsha Blackburn in 2018. This man won 95 out of 95 counties in this state in 2006. He lost 92 and 95 counties in 2018. We have been down in the dumps, and what he has done with his unforced error is put some energy in this party. Now, here's what I think is important. This is a very gerrymandered state, but it's also, the reality of it is, it's a Republican state. About 61% of the state voted for Donald Trump. So this state's not going to be competitive in any capacity statewide, but I do think it's going to create some momentum and maybe help Democrats start investing in red states where, look, any win's a win for us. We are 60% Republican, but because of gerrymandering, Republicans control 80% of the seats in the state.
Christopher, I'm glad you just brought up just the recent history in Tennessee. It's only been 31 years. That I say only because I think in some other states it's been much longer than that. That you've had members of Tennessee, the majority of which vote for a Democratic candidate for the presidency, most notably Bill Clinton in 92, 96. Yeah. And while as you're mentioning the fact that at 60%, it's a very big uphill battle, and you're also alluding to other red states that potentially Democrats may put some energy to. I want to just have you zero in and expand on that about where is that potential for the party, the Democratic Party in this case, to start putting energy into states that, in the case of Tennessee, at one point did support Democratic candidates.
Sure. So Tennessee is the history of Tennessee is very much still colored by the Civil War. As we know, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican president, a Union president. And really what you saw as a backlash against Abraham Lincoln, against the Union, and the Confederates and Democrats were aligned. So from the Civil War to 2010, this state was completely, almost totally in control of the Democratic Party, which is probably hard for a lot of people to imagine. But what's also hard to imagine is how quickly it turned. What Tennessee has never had is a divided government. That is not something that's in the history and the DNA of Tennessee. It's been one party rule, Democrats for 150 years, now Republicans for 20. But I think what's changed about it is Democrats used to always have the rural vote. The rural vote is very much right now gone for the Democratic Party. But what we never had was the suburban vote. And really what you're seeing, what the goal is from Democratic leaders across the country, but here in the South, is what we call the Atlantification of Nashville. So Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta are, of course, why Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff are the United States senators from Georgia. Two Democratic senators from Georgia as a Southerner was unimaginable 10 years ago. But it's because the Atlanta suburbs, those metros, Buckhead, Marietta, et cetera, they started becoming bluer and bluer and bluer. And so really what you're looking at is the suburbs of Nashville are the biggest growth areas in the United States of America. And they are increasingly, they're not blue, but they're becoming bluer. So I think the suburbs are where the fights have been for Democrats nationally, but in the South, suburbs are our heart. That's where the growth is in the South. And it's really where the Democrats need to start competing if they want to have a chance down here.
Chris, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we actually had a historian on the program a while back telling us about obviously the historical nature of a Black man and a Jewish man getting elected to the Senate there between Ossoff and Warnock. I wanted to ask you on because you kind of surmised at the beginning of all this about why all of this happened, right? The gun violence that took place, another school shooting here, so many mass shootings that we've had so far just in this early part of the 2023 calendar year. And then Governor Bill Lee's response, which I didn't know was pre-recorded, but he mentioned about in that speech about his wife's best friend getting killed in this. I would love for you to expand for people that don't understand the gun laws in Tennessee, because at the root of all this, it was the protest about gun violence and nothing being done with respect to yet another mass shooting happening in this country. Can you take our audience a little bit inside, as somebody who has run to represent the state before, what the gun laws look like in Tennessee, and how do we, to Nick's point about the Democratic Party trying to gain momentum, like how do we gain momentum just on this issue and start to unify people about gun violence that's taking place in this country?
Well, so Tennessee has some of the loosest gun laws in the country, and quite frankly, the purveyors, the creators of that were the Democratic Party. Democratic Party in the South created the current gun laws that really are on the books in the state of Tennessee. There has been some attempt to slightly loosen those, but most of the gun laws in Tennessee we've seen have been in place because of Democratic majorities and Democratic governors and the rest. Tennessee has some of the, I think, the highest gun ownership in the United States per capita. So it is a very gun heavy culture. However, that is a rural reality. Gun ownership is much higher in rural Tennessee. And what we see is the violence, or the biggest concern about the violence, at least on the political indicator where it's making the biggest effect, is in suburbs. My niece and nephew, I'm from Rutherford County, which is one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. I come from a pretty conservative family. But you know, my sister-in-law, her children, my niece and nephew had to go get out of school for a day to have a school safety day, just to be prepared for a shooting after the Covenant shooting. Suburban women, in particular, are not married to the gun culture that has been so distinct in Tennessee, and so guns are an area where I think there is political movement to be had. Right now, we know that in some of the wealthiest conservative areas of the state, people support expanded background checks. They support red flag laws. They disagree with concealed carry. And so there is room for movement on these issues, at least in the electric. But the way the gerrymandered reality of Tennessee works in our state house, there's no chance of this being passed anytime soon. But it can be a political wedge issue to run on, which is unimaginable to me to say 20, 30 years ago, no one could run on gun reform in Tennessee and expect to have a day. But I think there is an opening, particularly in these suburban communities where most of these school shootings happen, are upscale conservative suburban communities. I think there is movement on this issue.
Quick break here. We are presented, as always, by Fresh Roasted Coffee. If you could see my screen here, Fresh Roasted Coffee since 2009. This Pennsylvania company has been delivering fresh roasted coffee. You can check out their website at freshroastedcoffee.com or shop them online through a bunch of different places. I'll read you something here. Nick, they roast the freshest coffee beans using the most eco-friendly roasting technology on earth. I happen to have a cup right here of fresh roasted coffee. I always record with it. Nick, why don't you tell the people, you're a coffee snob, why don't you tell the people why they should head on down to freshroastedcoffee.com and buy some of this amazing coffee?
First, Mike, let's talk about flavors. You know, if you are a single origin kind of person like you and myself, they've got you. If you are a flavor person, they've got you as well. Flavor packs, individual items as well. And it's not just coffee, folks. You can also get tea. My wife's a tea drinker, so freshroastedcoffee.com's got her too. But more importantly, you can learn about the coffee. When you get to the website, there's a quiz that tells you what's the coffee that's best for you. Sumatra is my blend, and they got that one right. I can tell you that for sure. They'll do the same for you when you head over to the website.
FreshRoastedCoffee.com. Go to our episode description right now. There's a link right there, and at checkout, you're going to get a discount for this amazing tasting coffee. Head to FreshRoastedCoffee.com today. And now back to the show.
Christopher, as we're talking, as the nation is looking now at Tennessee, obviously guns being a priority issue, regardless of political party, just the reality of the state. For you, being on the ground, what are the other priorities that the state of Tennessee should be addressing? Currently against U.S. News report, Tennessee's overall ranking as a state, I think, ranks at like 21st in the country, not particularly high in education. But from where you stand on that, what seems to be the priorities that are just currently not being addressed at the State House?
I think what we just talked about is an incredible juxtaposition. We've talked about most of the past 15 minutes about the suburbs. And the suburbs and urban communities of Tennessee are growing. Nashville, Middle Tennessee is growing, expanding. The life expectancy is increasing. The quality of education, healthcare is growing. But rural Tennessee and the rural South, where was the historic heart of my party, is falling by the wayside. I do not think the Republican legislature has done enough or anything on these issues, but they do talk better on these issues. They don't resolve healthcare, but they'll communicate in ways. Some might argue dog whistles that appeal to rural communities. But I think that the Democratic Party, if we ever do get in power in this state, really the number one issue is healthcare. Right now, in Tennessee, in rural Tennessee, you can get better healthcare in Baghdad, and that's not a joke. There is better healthcare in Iraq than in rural Tennessee. The rural maternity death rate here in Tennessee is some of the lowest in the country. It's interesting. I remember when John Kerry was running for president in 2004. He made this argument against the Iraq War. He said, we're building hospitals in Baghdad, and we're closing down fire halls in Boston. And I think that's actually an argument to be made. Is we are not investing enough in rural communities in rural Tennessee. And I think that's something that our party needs to fight for. Rural investment. People enjoy the rural way of life, but that is not something that's easily passed down. Kids are leaving small town Tennessee and going to Nashville, going out of state, but they want opportunities in these small communities. And obviously with the advent of the digital economy, there's possibilities there, but there's not enough investment. So I think this is the biggest issue that we face is rural healthcare, education, and opportunities outside the big cities of this state.
Christopher, one thing I wanted you to touch on for us was because now as Representative Pearson and Jones have been making the TV rounds, I saw them recently on MSNBC, and they were talking about Shelby County threatening to withhold some of the funding for these guys that got expelled if they are sent back as the representative. I would love for you to expand a little bit on that. And what do you think, prognostication hat being placed on your head right now, what do you think happens here with both of these two representatives that are representing such a large swath of Tennesseans out there? Are they going to be sent back? And what do we see as the forecast for the next couple of months shaking out here in Tennessee?
So I think if they aren't sent back, I am surprised at the silence of national Republicans. I'm surprised that actually, quite frankly, that someone like Mitt Romney hasn't spoken up on this issue. But at some point, these guys are not taking directives from the RNC. No one's calling. Trump hasn't called Governor Lee or Speaker Sexton. But this is clearly not a good issue for Republicans nationally. It actually might gain, truly, it might gain a point or two among the culture war issues here in the state. It might actually help them locally, but it's hurting them nationally. So I am surprised that no one has called in the troops from DC. There's not been phone calls made to Governor Lee. Governor Lee's been strangely silent on this expulsion issue. He doesn't want to touch it. But I do think that there's likely going to be at some point where there's an intervention here, because what's happening is they are hurting themselves. They're stepping on their on their candidate's foot. They're stepping on the national party's foot. I mean, think about it. In the last week, the former president of the United States of America got indicted. And on the front, that would happen on what, Tuesday? On the Monday, Tuesday? And on the front page of the Sunday New York Times and the Washington Post, that was below the fold. This has become the centerpiece issue, and it's not a winning issue. I think the vast majority of Americans do not think that this is worthy of expulsion. But more importantly, the way I very honestly frame it is in response to these shootings, these deaths, these killings of our neighbors, of 3 of God's children. We ask for action on gun reform. And in response, the Tennessee GOP expelled 3 members for standing up against gun violence. And so that's not responsive. So my prognostication is I do think this is going to end, but I think it's going to end not because of what's happening here. I think there's going to be a call that's going to have to be made because they're embarrassing the national party. No one, Ted Cruz is not jumping for joy at this. Donald Trump isn't as well. No one's supporting this because it's not a winning issue.
Well said. Christopher Hale, like I mentioned, he's a former Democratic nominee for Congress, former staffer to President Obama. Can't thank you enough. You're the first person I thought of, mainly because we follow each other on social media. But as you were tweeting out some of this stuff about what took place in Tennessee and some of the articles you were posting out, I was like, I got to reach out to him, have him on the program. Thank you so much for hopping on the pod and
Appreciate
educating
you
our
having
audience.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome back anytime too, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.